So traditionally in Australia, the transition from completing an undergraduate degree into a PhD program has been through what's called the add-on honours year. Honours is a one-year qualification, requires a LEAT entry. It's called a one-year qualification. It's about 9 months long in the main, and you do some combination of coursework and a small research thesis. Australia is the only country that has this kind of program as its key transition point between undergraduate and postgraduate research. And there's long been recognised that there are problems with the honours program, and universities across the country are trying to implement ways of dealing with that. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Firstly, what's Macquarie actually decided to do? Macquarie's decided to get rid of its add-on honours program, except in professional fields where it's required as an accreditation. And the key one for Macquarie is, of course, psychology. So in the psychology field, the add-on honours program will continue indefinitely, as long as it remains professional accreditation for psychologists. But all other disciplines, the last year of teaching the add-on honours program was 2013. So we're in the last year of the teaching of that program here at Macquarie. It's being replaced by a 2-year master's program, which is called, it's the first name for it, the proper name for it is the Master of Research. It actually officially has a slightly more complicated name, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But that program was introduced, the first year of that program was introduced this year, 2013, and in 2014, the first iteration of the second year of the program will be offered. So at the moment we're in a kind of transitional phase. We're still teaching honours programs, but we're teaching the first year of this program as well. But for admission to higher degree research, permission to the PhD program, you will have to have completed this degree or something equivalent to it from the 1st of January next year. So it's only up until the end of this year that we'll continue to accept honours as an admission criteria into PhD. Why has Macquarie decided to make this change? First reason, and these are reasons that have been identified and are broadly agreed upon by universities across the country. Honours is in decline. It's increasingly unattractive to students. That's long been a problem, that students have turned away from doing honours, but it's now reached an absolutely critical stage where honours enrolments are so small that it's no longer really viable as a program. The figures that I give are that the number of students completing higher education in Australia has dramatically increased over the last 10 or 15 years, but the number of honours enrolments has not kept pace with that. The number of bachelor's degrees completions in Australia expanded between 1999 and 2011 by 56%. So 56% of more people completed bachelor's degrees at the end of 2011 than completed them at the end of 1999. The number of honours completions only increased by 27%. So there's a widening gap between the number of people who are equipped to do honours, who are eligible to do honours, and the numbers who actually take that up. So there's a declining interest in honours amongst students. But there's an expanding interest in master's programs. Over that same period, master's coursework completions increased by a whopping 207% in Australia. So there's the figures, the one way of reading those figures is to see there's an increasing number of students completing bachelor's degrees. Fewer and fewer of them are interested in doing honours, but a massive expansion of the number are interested in doing master's degrees. And in fact, master's degrees are drawing students back into the system. So it's a huge attractor for students. The other problems that are recognised with honours is that the program is basically too short. It's too condensed. It's especially too condensed in comparison to the programs that are offered internationally. Almost every other jurisdiction in the world offers a 2-year transitional degree between undergrad and postgrad, and that takes a variety of forms. It's always been the case in North America, for example, that the PhD program has been a 5-year program, in which you do 2 years of coursework, which then leads on into a 3-year research project. If you have to apply to go on into the research project. If you're not accepted to go on, you leave the program with a master's degree based on your 2 years coursework. So they're doing a kind of undergraduate degree, then a combined master's PhD program. But it was really drawn, came to a head in Europe about 10 or 15 years ago in the Bologna process, where the education ministers of the European nations met in Bologna and agreed to standardise higher education qualifications around what's called the 3+2+3 model, which is basically an undergraduate degree that lasts 3 years, a master's degree that lasts 2 years, and then a 3-year PhD. Now that was to replace a huge variety of qualifications across Europe. My partner originally comes from Finland. In Finland, the traditional way of study was you would go into a 6-year degree after school, which was a kind of combined bachelor's master's degree. That wasn't the way it was practiced in a lot of other jurisdictions, but the Bologna process was about standardising those degrees across Europe so that it would allow increasing transferability, so students could move from one country to another as they progressed through their study. There's a variety of ways in which that happens. There are different programs structured in different ways, but the basic template across the Bologna countries remains that 3+2+3. So internationally, there's a different standard of preparation for PhD study. It involves more coursework and more substantial research training. And those are the two problems that have been consistently identified with honours. Students who've done honours, when they go into the PhD, they don't have a broad enough or deep enough understanding of their academic discipline in order for them to be really fully equipped to work in that discipline, but also, and more importantly perhaps, they don't know enough about the discipline to make really successful strategic decisions about what they're going to research. The other problem is that they're not really given enough substantial experience of doing a research project to equip them to do something as huge as the 3-year or longer PhD program. Now, the symptoms, some of the other problems that have been recognised with honours really surface in the PhD program when students are actually enrolled in the PhD. That students feel that in the first year of the program, when they've come from a fairly rapid honours program and into this much broader, more extended research project in their PhD, they feel unsupported, that it's an unstructured program, that they're not given the kind of guidance and support in developing their research methodology or in designing their research projects, and they often feel on their own. And that's the peak time for PhD students to drop out, is in the first year of the program. And often they complain about isolation, not being given sufficient guidance, not being given sufficient support. So there are problems that occur in the first year of the program. But the other symptom that indicates that there are problems with the preparation that people have when they go into PhD is that completion rates in the PhD are across the nation too long. PhD is kind of represented as being a 3-year degree. It's going to take you 3 years to do your research. The average completion time in Australia for PhD in about 2010 was 4.2 years. And Macquarie proudly was slightly ahead of that. We were on 4.16. So we were slightly, chuffed about that. But this 3-year program is taking people on average 4.2 years. Now if you factor into that about 40%, and in Macquarie's case it's more, about 40% of those candidates are international students, and international students in the main are on 3.5-year scholarships, and once those scholarships terminate, they're liable to pay fees, which can be up to $30,000 a year. That focuses their minds very effectively, and international students on the whole complete very close to that 3.5-year mark, and mostly before. So if you factor into that 4.2 average completion time that 40% of your cohort is finishing in less than 3.5, that means that the domestic cohort is taking much, much longer to complete. And in fact, in 2010, the national completion time for a domestic PhD candidate was 4.6 years, which by any measure was too long. It was certainly too long for the government. And the government has a big say in this because the government actually funds it. PhD programs for domestic candidates are feeless because the government supports it. So they're very anxious that people are taking too long to do it. They think it's ineffective. So if you take those two factors, that people are dropping out in the first year of their PhD and then they're taking much too long to do it, Macquarie's reading of that was that they were insufficiently prepared when they went into the program. So what we needed was to expand the preparation that was taking place between undergraduate and PhD. And there are a couple of other, I should say that's a widely recognised problem across the country. And other universities are dealing with that problem in very different ways. The University of Sydney, for example, has decided to move from a 3-year official PhD to a 4-year one. So the PhD at the University of Sydney will be a 4-year degree from now on. That's a huge challenge to them financially. The person there in my position is slightly anxious about the cost that that's going to involve for the institution. But it also means that that what you're doing in the first year of the PhD at the University of Sydney will be coursework based. So you move from doing an honours year, 4-year undergraduate degree, 3 years past degree, 1 year honours, then you move into a 4-year PhD. The 4-year PhD is going to be 4 years because the first year will be coursework, and that coursework will be largely generic, not discipline based. So that generic coursework, and then you'll move on to your research project. So they're looking at a different way of solving the same problem by going from a 3+1+3 to 3+1+4. Macquarie's going from 3+1+3 to 3+2+3. But when you say that 3, as I've kind of mentioned, the 3 for the PhD is a very soft number. It's actually 4+. We're looking at a very extended. The alternative of putting coursework in the PhD, which was one that Macquarie entertained, looked to us like it was going to just blow out the amount of time people were going to be spending on their PhDs, which wasn't good for them and wasn't good for the institution. So Macquarie's opted for this idea of going for the solid master's program in between as a really coherent preparation for PhD. The other 2 reasons that Macquarie made the change is that if you have really tiny numbers in your honours program, if there's only 1 or 2 people in your honours programs, and that's not atypical. In 2012, we had 190 students doing honours outside of psychology, and they were in 63 separate programs. So we had about an average of 3 students in each program. And not all of those students, in fact, only a small proportion of those students go on to PhD. So you have people going on to PhD, they don't have a sense of belonging to a cohort. They're not moving with a group of students into the PhD. So they feel increasingly isolated, which is also a problem for them. It's a problem for them in research. It's a problem for them in getting the support that they need for being part of a group. And finally, of course, because the Australian Honours qualification doesn't map onto international structures, it's difficult for Australian students to use it as a way of getting access to high degree research study internationally. Okay, so what's Macquarie doing? Macquarie's implementing this degree. It's a 2-year degree. The trouble with a lot of Australian institutions have tried to implement this degree in the past. The University of Melbourne did when it went with the Melbourne model about 10 or 15 years ago. And it did in a hybrid way. The University of Sydney did flirt with the idea of doing this, but it met some resistance, so they didn't go ahead with it, and they've gone for the 4-year PhD instead. But one of the main obstacles, and this is where it gets a bit boring and technical, but one of the main obstacles is that what Macquarie's actually doing is taking different parts of present structures of study and putting them together. The reason that institutions have found it difficult to do that in the past is the way higher education in Australia is funded. Higher education is funded basically on 2 separate schemes. It's more complicated than that, but for purposes of this discussion, on 2 separate schemes. The first this is for domestic students, the Commonwealth supported system in which students are allocated a place and they accrue a liability based on their enrolment. So if you're enrolled as a domestic student in an Australian degree, you accrue a HECS liability according to the program that you've studied, and you pay that off eventually down the track. Once you move over into the higher degree research, on the other hand, you're on what's called the Research Training Scheme, which was set up about 12 or 13 years ago. And under the Research Training Scheme, as I mentioned, the government pays. So domestic students don't pay anything for tuition fees for doing a PhD. So what Macquarie has done is it's taken the 4th year funding that was usually given to honours, and that funds the 1st year of the Masters of Research program. But it's the Research Training Scheme that funds the 2nd year. So for domestic students, you accrue a HECS liability in the 1st year of this program, and you're enrolled officially in an advanced undergraduate program like honours. It's on the Australian Qualifications Framework which is the list of all different qualifications in Australia and the levels that they're at level 8, which is the same as honours, and it's funded under Commonwealth supported places. So all you do is accrue a HECS liability. The second year of the program, if you complete that year and you go on into the second year, you don't receive another degree, but you go on and are enrolled in the full Masters of Research, and you don't pay any fees as a domestic candidate. And that's at AQF level 9, which is the level for Masters. If you choose to exit at the end of the first year, you're awarded a second undergraduate degree, the Bachelor of Philosophy. It was very important, however, for the government that all students enrolled in programs in Australia know what they're enrolled in and know what they're recognised as by the government. So if you're a domestic candidate, you're enrolled in this hybrid degree, the Bachelor of Philosophy for the first year, Masters of Research for the second year. And that's because there are certain entitlements that are available to people enrolled in undergraduate programs that are not available to people enrolled in Masters programs. Certain Centrelink entitlements, for example. And so the government insisted that all students enrolled, domestic students enrolled in this program, know that they're undergraduate students in the first year. International students, on the other hand, pay fees, same way that they do for all Australian programs, and are enrolled. They don't have to go through that hybrid program. They're enrolled in a 2-year Masters of Research from the beginning. So when you go to the website and you're looking to apply to do this program, you'll see that there are separate tracks for domestic and international students, and it's to do with this fee process. But anyway, that's the kind of boring technical side. On the academic side, the way this degree is structured is that you do a year of substantial coursework with a strong research inflection, and then you do a year built around a substantial research project. In the first year, what you do is 8 advanced undergraduate coursework units, 6 in your disciplinary area, and 2 that are more generic. And the 2 that are more generic are, firstly, you do one in research communications, which teaches you about the basic ways, skills that you need in order to communicate research in written form, in oral presentation, and in multimedia. And you also do a unit called Research Frontiers, and that's either taught at the department level or at the faculty level, in which you investigate or survey what are the key controversies in research, the cutting edge issues in research in your particular academic discipline. In the second year of the program, what you do is not built around units. It's a slightly different structure. It's a single year based up of a single coherent program defined by your discipline. But what it requires is that you meet certain activities. It's all in order for you to produce at the end of that year a 20,000 word research thesis. So you'll do activities like, well, you do another Research Frontiers unit, but this time not looking at what the key research issues are in your discipline, but more in your subdisciplinary area, in the immediately focused area of the subfield of research that you're interested in. So, you know, you might be studying English literature, that's part of my background. You might be studying English literature. So in the first year, you'll do a Research Frontiers unit. What are the key issues and controversies and debates going on in the field of English literature? In the second year, you're focusing in on your research. You're going to do a research project on Shakespeare. So you'll do reading and research about what are the key cutting edge issues in Shakespeare studies. You know, and you can see the analogy with any other discipline. The big picture, what's happening in the discipline, well, what's happening in the immediate area behind your research project. So that'll be a key component of the second year. You'll also do a review of the literature that's related to your project. You'll be finalising your research methodology with your group. Usually you'll be sitting with the other students in your cohort and trying to elaborate and defend the particular research methodology that you've chosen. And you'll also be doing activities on research planning. And the research planning will not only be about planning the particular project that you're doing in that year, in the second year of your master's degree, but it will also see that project in the context of a broader long-term project, a 4-year project, of which you'll do the first year in the Masters of Research, but that will grow and develop, evolve into your PhD project as well. So you'll be conceiving of your research topic in your second year as a pilot study, if you like, a beginning study, an investigation of the field that will lead into your whole PhD project. Now the aim of this is to think that this is really like the first year of the old PhD, which is the time when you finalise your research method, you do your background reading, you develop your research plan, you really survey properly what's happening in your immediate field in order for you to complete your project. But this does it in a really structured way, where you'll be with led by academic staff. You'll be in a cohort with students. So you'll be working through all those necessary parts of building a long-term research project, but in a really structured way, in a really supported way, that allows you to be confident that by the time you complete this year, you've got your plan in place, you know what the field is, you're really equipped to go on to do a PhD project. Okay, just quickly some words about the conditions. The admissions criteria for this are the same as they were for an honours program, which is basically, in Macquarie terms, Macquarie operates a 4-point GPA scale. It's an overall GPA of 2.5 with a GPA in the final year of study of 3. And that's about a credit average in the final year. 3 is a credit average, 2.5 is between a pass and a credit. So it's not, I mean, it's not a prohibitively elite program, and about, I think, somewhere between 20 and 30% of students fall into that band. Some other disciplines have higher levels of admission requirement. The other thing that you get is that, and this is fixed and guaranteed for domestic students, all domestic students in the first year of the program receive $8,000, and they do that according to their census date enrolment. So the census dates for the Commonwealth Supported Places program, for the HEX program, are March 31st, as you know, and August 31st. If you're enrolled at the end of March in this program, if you're still enrolled, you'll receive a cheque for $4,000, and again in August, if you're enrolled, you'll receive another one. Second year of the program, if you attain a 75% average across all your units in the first year, then you get a $16,000 scholarship paid fortnightly in the second year of the program. I'll talk a little bit more about HDR scholarships in a minute, but that funding is also available to a proportion of international students, and so that's a budgeting issue that's just being finalised at the moment. So it's not absolutely guaranteed for international students, but this year, for example, all international students were paid these scholarships, but that hasn't been absolutely guaranteed for next year. But it is certainly going to be an option for international students. Okay, well, what happened this year? What happened this year was our target enrolment was 200 students, and at the census date at the end of March, we had 237. And we're now down, we've had natural attrition, as most programs do, so it's now down to about 228, I think, is the current enrolment. And as I mentioned earlier, Macquarie is still teaching its honours programs, and there are over 80 students still doing honours. So we have about 320 students doing combined pathways, the different mainstream pathways programs that run on into PhD. And that's up from about 190 in the last year, in which we had 190 on non-psychology honours completions in 2012. So we had nearly a 70% increase in the number of students who are on that track between undergrad and PhD, which is a huge success story for the university. It's a big win. The students, it vindicates those figures which show that students are not attracted to doing honours but are more attracted to doing a program like this. We also have a strong student demand for the second year of the program. If you've completed an honours degree already or another kind of master's program, then you can gain admission to the middle of this program. You can be given a year's credit into this program and go straight on into the second year. And we already have something like 187 applications for 2014 for people to do that, on top of the cohort of students who are already here, and the office is complaining of overwork because of the amount of interest that the program has generated, which is hugely good news for the university. Now, the student feedback, we've just run focus groups for the present cohort of students, and I was, I've been very, this is something that I'm kind of responsible for, and so I've been very anxious about how it's been going, and there have been a lot of teething problems. There's no denying that. With any new program, there have been a number of issues that we've had to iron through. There have been challenges in the research communications unit, which is trying to teach research skills for people in disciplines as varied as, archaeology and statistics, or economics and finance, next to the people who are studying Chinese. How do you teach research communications to all these people from different disciplines? And so that's been a challenge, and we've had a lot of feedback about that, and there are changes that we're going to make to the way that unit is taught. And there have also been difficulties in just the setting up the new program in administration and some of the, just the practical arrangements in classes and so on. But overall, the student feedback that we received was, to me, astonishingly positive. People talked about the program as fantastic, fabulous, a great opportunity. One student said it was a magnificent program. So there's a lot of very positive feeling about the program as well. What also came through is that there's a really high number of students who are very geared up to do research and very focused and ambitious to do research and had identified themselves as researchers in high school. And this program is really geared towards those people, people who want to do individual autonomous research projects where they're investigating new ideas on their own, coming up with new material and you know, designing experiments, conducting field work. There's a lot of people who are very, very passionate about that. And this program's trying to kind of tap into that energy and passion early on. And also there was a strong sense that people were getting the kinds of benefits that we were hoping they would get. Sense of belonging to a cohort, sense of confidence in their knowing what their academic field is like, sense that their communication skills were really developing. And that also they were starting to look at what the international opportunities were for the portability of this program. I'll just end, this is my last slide, I'll just end by talking about what happens to students once they complete this degree and where they go on afterwards. After students will complete, the first, of course, cohort of students will complete this degree at the end of 2014, and they will go on into a 3-year PhD program as structured by the 3+2+3 logic. To gain admission into that program, they will need to get at least 75 as their result in the second year of the program. And that's just the standard, that's basically what you would have required when you complete an honours year to go on into PhD. You need to get an honours Class 2 Division 1, which basically the cut-off at most Australian universities is 75. So that's just direct translation of the same criteria that now operate between honours and PhD. But if you get, for domestic students, if you get over 85 in the second year of the program. And actually from the results in the first semester so far, a really high proportion of students are on track to meet both of these benchmarks. If you get over 85, you'll automatically be offered a scholarship for your PhD, which means you'll automatically be offered the now $25,000 a year stipend to go on into your PhD. Situation for international students is more complicated because international students are not on the research training scheme and are required to pay fees. But there will be a high number of scholarships that are available both from the university and also from the government under the International Postgraduate Research Scholarship Scheme. And also from a lot of home countries. And the most prominent for that is China. Macquarie has negotiated a deal with the China Scholarship Council, which is the biggest funder, I think, of study, not only at high degree research level, but at all levels. It must be the biggest funder in the world. It funds thousands and thousands of Chinese students to study abroad. Macquarie negotiated an agreement with that their scholarships will be available not only for students doing the PhD, but for doing the second year of the Masters of Research and the PhD as a combined thing. And as I mentioned earlier, there will be recognition for students in prior learning. Students who've done already an honours or master's degree will be able to get credit into the program, usually getting a year's credit if they've completed an honours program. And last piece of information, applications close on October the 31st. So if you need any more information about that, go to the website hdr.mq.edu.au. Sorry, I should have put that up. hdr.mq.edu.au and click on the icon that says Research Training Pathway, and that'll take you to the website that'll give you all the information about this. And we've got to go.